When a frightened voice from the past reaches Archie Goodwin at midnight, the trail leads straight to murder, espionage, and Nero Wolfe's most dangerous investigation yet. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. The Man I Spared at Belgrade. If there's a worse hour for sentiment than just before midnight, I don't know it. The Riviera had thinned to a few diehards nursing their last illusions and cheaper whiskey when the payphone in the corner started ringing as if it knew my name. I was halfway through a ginger ale, doctor's orders for a stomach that had been through Wolf's Sauerbraten, and already deciding whether to pretend I'd gone deaf. But fate, or habit, got the better of me. "Goodwin speaking," I said. The voice on the line was cracked glass, European, precise, and terrified. "Mr. Goodwin, you saved my life once in Belgrade, you remember?" I didn't. The closest I'd come to Belgrade was a bar on 43rd that served slivovitz and bad polka. "Friend," I told him, "if I'd been doing rescues overseas, I'd have charged overtime." He ignored the humour. "I must see Mr. Wolfe tonight. It is a matter of life and, yes, death." I asked him to define whose. He hung up instead. That left me with two choices: go home and let Wolfe's blood pressure rise naturally, or go home and raise it myself. Either way, I'd get blamed. I paid the check, tipped the waiter, and headed out into the drizzle that passes for spring in Manhattan. The cab's wiper kept time with my headache all the way to West 35th. Inside the brownstone, the air was thick with Fritz's bedtime coffee and the smell of a man who considered sleep an uncivilized interruption. Wolfe was in his office, wearing the same expression Pharaoh probably used on rebellious slaves. A copy of Harper's lay open on his desk beside a half-emptied beer glass that shimmered like amber judgment. "You are late," he observed. "I was communing with the outside world," I said. "It claims to miss you." He grunted, a low volcanic warning. "And you have brought it back with you, no doubt." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared in the doorway like a polite ghost, napkin still in hand. "A gentleman insists, sir," he said. "Foreign. Wet." I looked at Wolfe. "See? My reputation for hospitality precedes me." He closed the magazine, which was a concession on the level of surrender. "Archie, if this is another of your nocturnal imbeciles seeking justice or liquor, then you can tell him yourself. He's dripping on the stoop." Wolfe sighed, pulled the bell cord that ruled his kingdom, and leaned back. "Admit him. But if he utters one word during my digestion, I shall personally escort him to perdition." That picture almost made me curious. I brought the visitor in. He was tall in the way hunger makes a man, lean, sharp, hollow-cheeked. His coat looked borrowed from someone who'd died better dressed. Rain streaked his grey hair, and his eyes were the sort that had watched too many trains leave. "Dragan Milic," he said, bowing as if there were still courts left to bow to. "You are Archie Goodwin. You do not remember me." "Not yet," I said. "But give me a hint." I collect admirers. Wolfe's brows lifted an inch. "Your name again?" He repeated it, reverent as a confession. "I was in Belgrade in 44. I worked for the diplomatic corps. Mr. Goodwin was there briefly." "I was in Jersey City in 44, I said. "They're easy to confuse if you squint." He pressed on. "Someone I spared there has come to kill me here." Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a long chord of disbelief. "Spared, sir?" Milic nodded. "During the occupation. A man under sentence, he begged for life. I granted it. Tonight I received word he remembers." From his pocket he drew an envelope, pale blue, addressed in neat European script. "To the man I spared at Belgrade." The handwriting trembled, but the ink was new. Wolfe gestured toward the red leather chair opposite him. "You will sit, Mr. Milic, and you will explain briefly, lucidly, and without theatrics. Mr. Goodwin is not a sentimentalist, and I am not nocturnal by preference." Milic sat, hands clasped as if he feared they'd betray him. "There are debts one cannot pay," he began. "This man, this ghost, knows everything. Names, deeds, compromises. If he is in New York," Archie Goodwin, international hero, had heard enough. "What exactly do you want from us, besides keeping you alive till breakfast?" He looked from me to Wolfe. "Protection, perhaps. Advice. I can pay." That word got Wolfe's eyelids to move. He studied Milic's the way a chess player eyes a broken pawn. "Mr. Milic, I accept clients whose minds are intact and whose pursuers are not imaginary. You, I fear, qualify on neither count. Goodwin, call a taxi." Millix rose, desperate. "You think I am mad, but he will kill me as surely as we sit here. He was an American agent once, before everything changed." I recognized his voice on the telephone. "The police?" I suggested. He shook his head violently. "He is within them, or above them. No, only Mr. Wolfe can see what others miss. They say you do not leave this house, yet you reach everywhere." Wolfe's lips twitched. He almost smiled. "Flattery, Mr. Millix, is a tonic, but not curative. You will come again tomorrow, 11 o'clock. Mr. Goodwin will record your tale then, not now. At present, I require silence and digestion." Millix opened his mouth to argue, thought better of it, and instead placed the envelope carefully on the edge of Wolfe's desk. "Then take this. It explains all." He bowed again and left, the front door closing like the end of a chapter. I waited until Fritz's footsteps faded. "You know, boss, if saving lives in Belgrade was on my resume, I'd have asked for hazard pay." "Pfui." Wolfe nudged the envelope with one finger as if it might stain. "The man is a lunatic or an actor. Either way, he intrudes." I picked it up. "Shall I open it?" "No, tomorrow, after breakfast. If it contains lunacy, it can wait. If peril, it will not perish overnight." I put it in the safe. Routine, like brushing your teeth before bed. Still, I couldn't help noticing the seal was broken once and resealed with new wax. Red, slightly smudged. That's a habit of people who don't trust their own mail. Wolfe had resumed reading, his face settling back into its usual stone composure. "Archie, you will please inform Mr. Millix's corpse, if one materializes, that I decline to be involved." "That's comforting," I said. "If he's dead, he'll take it personally." He didn't answer. He reached for the bell cord instead. "Fritz, the remainder of the beer." Fritz entered silently with a fresh glass on a tray. Wolfe poured it with priestly gravity, inhaled, and took a sip that ended the discussion. I looked at the rain streaking the office window. Somewhere out there was a man I'd never met who thought I'd saved his life, and another man ready to collect on that mistake. In my experience, midnight debts like that don't stay unpaid long. When Wolfe dismissed me with a flutter of fingers, I went upstairs to my room. The brownstone was quiet, except for the hum of the city outside and the faint hiss of the radiator. I undressed, set my gun on the nightstand, and lay staring at the ceiling. I'd had calls before, crackpots, scared dames, hustlers with stories, but this one had a weight to it, like a ghost leaning on your chest. At 2:30 I gave up on sleep and padded down to the office. The envelope still sat there, patient as a vulture. I turned on the desk lamp, half expecting Wolfe to materialize and lecture me on restraint. Instead, the orchids upstairs hummed softly under the plant room lights, their perfume drifting faintly down the elevator shaft. I looked at the envelope again. The script was elegant, the kind diplomats use for lies. To the man I spared at Belgrade. Not from the man you spared. Whoever wrote it wanted the guilt aimed one way. I poured myself coffee from the side table, cold but honest, and sat watching the wax gleam under the lamp. A red herring crossed my mind. Maybe it was just another refugee shaking ghosts loose for attention. New York was full of them, but then most red herrings I'd met had knives. When the grandfather clock in the hall struck 3, I locked the envelope back in the safe and shut off the light. Wolfe could sleep through Armageddon, but I had the uneasy feeling that when he woke, our peaceful little routine, orchids at 9, beer at noon, peace at never, was about to get complicated. And if Mr. Dragan Milic really had spared somebody back in Belgrade, I had the sinking notion the fellow wasn't grateful. The first sound I heard that morning was Fritz yelling my name like it was a 4-alarm fire in the kitchen. That alone was enough to get me out of bed. Fritz doesn't yell, he announces. So when he skipped the announcement and went straight to panic, I figured either the stove had exploded or someone had died. Turned out I was half right. By the time I reached the front hall, Fritz was standing on the stoop in his robe and slippers, arms flapping like a windmill in distress. The early sunlight made the mist look silver over the small patch of brownstone garden we humorously call a stoop oasis. On the flagstones at the bottom of the steps lay Dragan Milic, the man who'd delivered last night's bedtime story about Belgrade and ghosts. He wasn't talking now. He was lying on his side, one arm tucked under him, eyes staring at nothing interesting. The knife hilt protruded from under his ribs like an afterthought someone forgot to clean up. Whoever did it had been neat about it. One thrust, short and sure, and no footprints worth mentioning on the damp stones. I said something unprintable and bent closer. The rain had washed the edges of the blood into pink halos. His coat pockets were turned out like they'd been searched, but whoever had done the job had put them back the way a maid straightens pillows. "He is dead," Fritz managed, white as his apron. "Sharp as ever," I told him. "Go tell Wolfe before he comes down here in his pyjamas and thinks we're gardening." Fritz hurried inside, and I squatted next to the body. I didn't touch the knife. No need to complicate my social life with fingerprints, but I did check the inside pocket. There was a torn passport, Yugoslav, folded like origami and half soggy. A second pocket gave me a small envelope stamped US Department of Commerce, import permit, art objects. That was it. No wallet, no note, no ticket stub to Belgrade. At 7:18 a.m. I called headquarters. The switchboard operator knew me well enough to skip the introductions. "Put me through to Inspector Kramer," I said. By 7:42 the street outside was full of blue uniforms, notebooks, and the sound of authority trying to look confident before breakfast. Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins arrived first, his bulldog face folding into suspicion the second he saw me. "So the stiff crawled back to your doorstep to die, huh?" "That's initiative," I said. "You want a statement or a seat?" He snorted and waved 2 patrolmen toward the garden. I went back inside, where the smell of coffee and Wolfe's irritation were both gaining strength. He was in the office, of course, in his yellow silk dressing gown that could have covered an elephant. He had one hand around a cup of coffee Fritz had clearly forced on him, and the other hand pointing like a judge's gavel. "Archie," he said, "you are culpable of inviting calamity. I specifically instructed you to defer that man until 11. He didn't take well to waiting, I told him. He decided to keep the appointment early and permanent. Wolfe's mouth compressed. "Explain." I gave him the details. Fritz finding the body, the knife, the passport, the permit. He listened with the same expression he uses when someone insults food. "Stabbed," he said finally. "With what?" "Ordinary kitchen knife. 8 inches, wooden handle. From the look of it, not ours." He closed his eyes for a long second. "Pfui. A murder on my stoop. Do you appreciate the affront, the indecency?" "Sure," I said. "We'll have to charge rent." He ignored that. "The police will infest this house like vermin. You will be courteous but reticent. Give them nothing but the bare sequence of facts. We do not volunteer for official futility." "That's my favourite policy," I said. Unfortunately, Kramer's not big on policies that aren't his. The bell rang. That saved me from another lecture. I opened the door to let in Kramer himself, puffing like a tugboat, cigar already lit. His coat collar was up, and his eyes had the kind of morning fire that could toast marshmallows. "Goodwin," he barked. "You couldn't wait till business hours." "Sorry, Inspector," I said. "Our guest checked out early." He brushed past me into the office, trailing cigar smoke like a banner. "Where's Wolfe?" "On display." Kramer stopped in front of the desk. "So, another one dies on your doorstep, eh? You running a collection?" Wolfe didn't rise. He rarely does for law enforcement. "Inspector, if you intend to accuse me, do it succinctly. Otherwise, sit." Kramer eyed the big chair as if it might bite him, then remained standing. "Your man here phoned it in, which was smart for once. The deceased is Dragan Milic, Yugoslav national, no local address. What was he doing here?" "He came last night seeking employment," Wolfe said smoothly. "I declined. Mr. Goodwin will corroborate." I nodded. "He had a bad case of nerves and a story about someone trying to kill him. Guess he was right." Kramer grunted. "Any witnesses?" "Fritz found him," I said. "The neighbours saw nothing but the milkman. You can question the bottles if you like." Pearlie entered, handing Kramer a small evidence bag. "Passport, torn up, and this permit thing." Kramer examined them, eyebrows climbing. "Import permit, art objects. What kind of art?" Wolfe's tone sharpened. "That, Inspector, is your province." Kramer ignored the barb. "This passport, half the name's missing, but the alias matches a suspect from the OSS lists we still got lying around. Some black market artist turned informant after the war. I'll check with Washington." "That would be prudent," Wolfe said. "Meanwhile, you will of course remove the corpse from my premises expeditiously." Soon as the photographer's done, Kramer turned toward me. "And you, Goodwin, stay put. You're not to leave town until we get this straight. I was planning a trip to Staten Island, I said, but for you I'll postpone. He gave me a look that could melt glass and went out to bark orders. Wolfe pressed the bell cord. Fritz. Fritz appeared at once, still pale but steady. Yes, sir. Breakfast for 2. I will not let homicide interfere with nutrition. Yes, sir. When Fritz left, Wolfe turned to me. The passport and permit, did you read them? Enough to know our client wasn't importing tulips. The permit's for art objects, which could mean anything from icons to stolen sculpture. And the passport alias, well, the ink says one thing, the paper another. Somebody doctored it. Indeed, he rubbed his chin. A war refugee, an import license, an alias. Motifs of concealment and guilt, I grinned. You forgot murder. That ties them up nicely. He shot me a glance that could have chilled soup. Your levity is ill-timed. Yeah, but it keeps the blood circulating. Outside, the flashbulbs popped as the photographer finished. Kramer re-entered, hat tilted back, cigar chewed nearly in half. All right, he said. Body's going to Bellevue. You can reclaim your front walk after we're done dusting for prints. Don't move anything. Would that include ourselves? I asked. He ignored me. And Wolfe, if you find out something before we do, for once in your life try sharing. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Inspector, I share only what merits belief. Kramer blew smoke toward the ceiling. Yeah, and the day you believe in cooperation will be the day I believe in miracles. He started for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, this guy Millick was mixed up with some pretty shady refugee trades. You might want to remember that before you start feeling civic-minded. Your solicitude is touching, Wolfe murmured. After the front door slammed, the silence hung heavy. Wolfe looked at the window where sunlight was trying to break through the mist. Archie, he said finally, summarize your impressions. He was scared, broke, and carrying paperwork worth stealing. Whoever killed him knew where he'd be and didn't mind public stoops. Could be political, could be personal. Take your pick. Wolfe nodded slowly. And the weapon? Standard kitchen issue. No monogram, no fingerprints, Stebbins checked. Then we are at an impasse until evidence ripens. Meaning you're not moving till lunch, I said. Correct. Fritz returned with the tray, omelette, toast, coffee, the works. Wolfe took it like a man receiving communion. He ate in deliberate silence, every bite an editorial against chaos. I sat at my desk and began typing the statement Kramer would demand later, careful to make it as dull as possible. How's this for volunteering nothing? I asked when I finished. Wolfe dabbed his mouth with a napkin. Adequate. The inspector will misinterpret it, of course. Sure, I said, but at least we'll both be consistent. He leaned back, the great dome of his head settling into contemplation. There is something repugnant about murder before breakfast. It spoils the palate. Yeah, I said, and it ruins the landscaping. That got me a glare sharp enough to prune roses. At 8:15 the last uniform left. The stoop was scrubbed clean, though I doubted Fritz would use it again before winter. Wolfe finished his coffee, rang for beer, then changed his mind. Not yet. It is still morning. He turned his chair toward the window. Archie, file the passport and permit for reference. Photostat both before surrendering to the police. Right. As I crossed to the safe, the brownstone felt too quiet, like a stage after the curtain drops. Outside, a patrolman's whistle faded. I looked down at the damp mark on the stone where Millick had been and wondered how many ghosts Belgrade had exported to Manhattan. Wolfe spoke again without turning. You will, of course, remain within call. If Inspector Kramer returns, tell him I'm occupied. Occupied with what? Digesting, he said. That ended the morning conference. Fritz entered once more, this time with a feather duster, and began cleaning near the desk with funereal delicacy. I took that as my cue to head upstairs for a shower and a change of suit. There's something about dead men before breakfast that makes a man appreciate hot water. By the time I came back down, the mist had lifted from the street. A delivery truck rattled by, and the city was starting its daily noise. Inside, Wolfe had opened the Times and was already turning the pages with the same calm disdain he'd shown Kramer. Any headlines? I asked. Only that civilization persists, he said. Regrettably. He reached for the bell cord again, signaling the world that order, at least within one brownstone, had been restored. That was Wolfe for you. Murder outside, breakfast inside, and the orchids due at 9. And me? I just hoped the next corpse had the decency to pick another address. If you ever want to know what guilt looks like in guilt, take a stroll through a midtown gallery at 11 in the morning. That's when the air still smells of last night's cocktails and expensive worry. The Yugoslav Relief Gallery was one of those places where the frames were thicker than the morals. I had dressed for neutrality, grey suit, brown fedora, expression of polite ignorance, and was greeted by a young man who looked carved out of cigarette smoke. "Mrs. Millett can see you now," he said, as if announcing Judgment Day. Inside, the walls glittered under spotlights that made every brushstroke beg for absolution. Paintings of ruined cathedrals and Balkan peasants glared down like witnesses. At the far end, a woman in black stood beside a marble pedestal, too poised to be comfortable. Her dress was plain, but the pearls weren't. "Mrs. Millett," I said. She turned with a faint accent that could melt varnish. "You are Mr. Goodwin. My husband spoke of you." I nodded. "He did it on short notice. I'm sorry for your loss." She inclined her head, the sort of bow that belongs in embassies. "My husband had many troubles. Perhaps they are over now." The place was quiet, except for the soft tick of an ornate clock that probably cost more than my car. I let my eyes drift over the canvases, half to look professional, half to hide curiosity. One painting caught me, a bombed-out street in Belgrade, grey smoke curling upward, signature scrawled in the corner, A. Radek. I pointed. Good piece, melancholy with a sales tag. The new voice belonged to Anton Radek himself. He had entered without sound, all charm and cologne, wearing a suit the colour of confidence. His smile was lacquered to perfection. "Ah, you admire my work. It is from memory." "Some memories sell better than others," I said. He spread his hands. "True, but this gallery is not mine. It was Dragan's dream, to bring beauty from the ashes. You are investigating, yes?" I gave him my best neutral grin. "Let's call it visiting. Wolfe sent me to pay respects, ask questions, maybe sniff the wallpaper." Mrs. Millick's fingers tightened on the pearls. "Mr. Wolfe, the detective? Then you think my husband's death was not accident?" "I think knives are poor tools for accidents." Radek's smile didn't flicker, but his eyes sharpened. "You Americans are blunt. Sometimes it saves translation fees." He gestured toward a side room. "Please, we will talk there." The private office looked like a diplomat's den. Persian rug, heavy curtains, and an ashtray overflowing with foreign brands. A painting of the Danube at dusk hung above a walnut desk, and a decanter waited like a bribe. Radek poured 3 glasses of something golden. Slivovitz, to remember. "Thanks, miss," I said, "but I'm on duty." I set it down untouched. He drank both his and Mrs. Millick's without blinking. "You understand," he began smoothly. "Dragan was troubled. He had debts, emotional, political, perhaps spiritual. Since the war, he tried to rebuild what was lost. Sometimes he sold pictures that were not entirely authentic." "Meaning forged." Radek smiled as if I'd complimented his grammar. "Let us say inspired by originals. It was for a cause, helping refugees, feeding the past. We are all dealers now, Mr. Goodwin. Some sell art, some sell truth." I jotted a note in my pad, which meant I drew a cartoon of Wolfe holding a palette. "That's touching. Any idea who might have bought his last masterpiece?" "Many admired, few purchased. Americans like their tragedies framed but unsigned." Mrs. Millick spoke suddenly, voice brittle. "He was afraid. For weeks he said someone watched him. He thought it was old enemies from the Balkans." "Enemies or partners?" I asked. She looked away. Radek answered for her. "Both. In our world they are the same." I decided to shake the tree. "You were his partner?" "In art, yes. In conscience, no." "Was that painting in the front, the one with your name, the same artist who signed the import permit I found on Millick's?" His eyelids flickered a beat too long. "Permit?" I smiled pleasantly. "Government paper. Lists A. Radek as supplier of art objects. Thought you might clear up the coincidence." Mrs. Millick's knuckles whitened on her pearls. Radek leaned back, eyes calculating. "Perhaps Dragan used my name for convenience. In Yugoslavia, names were currency." "Sure," I said. "So are lies," he chuckled. "You Americans suspect everyone. Maybe you should suspect your own." "That's a popular export," I told him. "We make plenty." A long silence settled like smoke. Then Radek stood, smoothing his jacket. "Mr. Goodwin, grief makes bad business. Unless you wish to buy a painting, I suggest we stop trading ghosts." "Fair, but before I go, who painted that portrait of the woman near the door? The one with the cracked varnish?" He hesitated. "An obscure artist, died in the war." "The same obscure artist whose signature appears on the import permit," I said. "You might want to file for royalties." That earned me the faintest smile. "You are sharp, Mr. Goodwin, but not sharp enough to cut truth from rumour." "Maybe, but I keep a good knife sharpener back home." He showed me out personally, every gesture courteous, every muscle taut. As I stepped into the main hall, Mrs. Millix followed me. "Mr. Goodwin," she whispered, "be careful. Dragan said the same thing, truth from rumour. He thought it was a joke. It was not." Before I could ask more, Radek called her name sharply in Serbian, and she vanished like a shadow. At the desk, I signed the visitor book and asked for any publicity stills of their last show. The clerk slid me a snapshot of Millix beside an American officer. I thanked him and pocketed it. Outside, the spring sun was trying to dry yesterday's murder. Midtown was already humming, taxis' horns, the city pretending it didn't have secrets. I ducked into a phone booth on the corner and dialed home. Wolfe answered on the third ring, which meant Fritz had fetched him from the Orchids under protest. "Yes, Archie?" "Reporting from the art front. I've met the widow, elegant, frightened, possibly genuine, and one Anton Radek, who could charm a customs officer blind. Millix may have been running a line in forged paintings. Permit matches Radek's name. Also, there's a portrait signed with the same hand." Wolfe made a sound like distant thunder. "Forged art, fui, a repellent trade and common among displaced Europeans seeking both money and redemption. You will tread delicately. Balkan temperaments erupt like faulty boilers." "Sure, I'll keep the lid on." "I mean it literally," he said. "Do not provoke emotional excess. They dramatize. You are ill-equipped for melodrama." "Thanks for the vote of confidence." "Your impertinence is habitual but not incurable. Did you obtain photographs or receipts?" "Not yet. Radek kept the ledgers locked tighter than your beer supply." "Then return," Wolfe ordered. "At 4:30, when fatigue dulls vigilance. Artists are never punctual." "I'll pencil it in between dodging knives." "Archie," he said patiently, "murder is never improved by flippancy." "Depends who's getting murdered." There was a small, reluctant pause, the Wolfe equivalent of a sigh. "Take care, please." That was as close to affection as he'd ever issue over a phone line. When I hung up, I scribbled the address and time in my notebook. The booth smelled of metal and last night's cigars. A red herring floated through my mind. Maybe Millix hadn't been scared of Radek at all. Maybe the widow's pearls weren't just sentimental. Pearls travel better than paintings, and customs inspectors look the other way for grief. I walked 2 blocks to a lunch counter and ordered coffee strong enough to dissolve enamel. The morning replayed itself in my head, the nervous widow, the smooth partner, the ruined city canvases that looked almost staged. Everyone had a masterpiece for sale, none for keeps. At 12:45, I headed back to the brownstone. Fritz opened the door before I touched the bell. His timing could shame a butler. The aroma of lunch hit me first, veal with tarragon, and Wolfe's voice came next from the office. "Archie, you will be precisely 3 minutes late to table if you continue to loiter." "I like making an entrance," I said, joining him. He was already seated, napkin tucked, eyes glinting over a platter of asparagus. "Report succinctly." I gave him the condensed version, Radek's charm, Vera's fear, the forged art angle, and the matching signature. He listened, chewing thoughtfully. Forgery, he mused, an art in itself, and a metaphor, to create the false in the guise of preservation. How very Balkan. "Yeah," I said, "but one of them's preserving murder now." "Indeed. You will return this afternoon. Bring back tangible data, names, transactions, handwriting samples. And Archie, do not fraternize unnecessarily with the widow." "Meaning keep my hat on?" "Meaning keep your head." Fritz appeared with the dessert trolley. Wolfe's tone softened. "After luncheon I shall resume with the Orchids. You may utilize the typewriter to file your notes. Clarity first, ornament second." "That's rich coming from you." He ignored me, sampling the custard. At 1 o'clock sharp, ritual triumphed over inquiry. He rose, dabbed his lips and declared, "Now the world must wait." While he vanished upstairs for his orchid hour, I sat at the desk, typing the morning's record for the files. The sound of the keys filled the office like distant gunfire. Between lines, I caught myself glancing at the window. Midtown's glitter had faded from my shoes, but its smell still clung, the perfume of money wrapped in secrets. When I finished, I tucked the carbon into the case folder labelled Milik, Belgrade. The phone stayed silent, which meant Kramer hadn't yet connected Milik's corpse to the art racket. I knew that silence wouldn't last. By 3:30 I was ready to head back into the jungle of galleries, but Fritz intercepted me with a look of mild reproach. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe has not yet approved your departure." "I'll take my chances." "Then please, be careful," he said quietly. That made 2 people today who thought I needed saving. Maybe they were right. I stepped outside into the bright Manhattan afternoon, notebook in pocket, and the echo of Wolfe's voice in my ear. Do not provoke emotional excess. I promised myself I'd try, but in this business emotions were the only currency that never devalued. And somewhere between the gilt frames and the ghosts of Belgrade, somebody was still cashing in. By the time the clock's hands crawled past 9 that night, the brownstone smelled of cigar smoke and bureaucracy, both courtesy of Inspector Kramer. He'd parked himself in the red leather chair like he owned stock in homicide, a government envelope balanced on one knee. Wolfe sat opposite, dome gleaming under the desk lamp, fingers steepled in that saint-about-to-condemn pose he favours when the company's official. I took the corner seat where a man can breathe. Kramer's cigar glowed like a lighthouse. "All right, Wolfe. You said you wanted facts, not fumes. Here they are. We dug up your dead man's name in the OSS files. Milik, Dragan, attached to intelligence work in Yugoslavia during the occupation. Translation, he wasn't just painting landscapes." Wolfe's brows lifted a fraction. "And what mischief, pray, does your government file allege?" Kramer thumbed open the envelope. The papers inside looked older than half our Constitution. "Not much. Most of it's redacted. But there's one juicy footnote. Milik once spared an enemy agent he was ordered to eliminate. Never named him. Record ends there." "Spared," Wolfe repeated softly, as if the word were a new species of fungus. I said, "If I'd spared anyone in Belgrade, I'd remember. It's not the kind of town that sends thank-you notes." Kramer's eyes cut to me. Maybe he spared someone who's back in town now, with a longer knife. "An engaging hypothesis," Wolfe murmured. "Have you identified this resurrected beneficiary?" "Not yet, but the OSS liaison who signed this report's still around, now with the State Department. I made a call. He hinted Milik's mercy wasn't exactly patriotic." Wolfe grunted. "And you bring this to me. Why? Out of devotion to justice or curiosity?" Kramer blew smoke toward the ceiling fan. "Because if this turns out to be federal, I'll have spooks crawling over my paperwork. You're the only civilian in this city who likes them less than I do." Wolfe's lips twitched. "Touché, Inspector. Proceed." Kramer passed the folder across the desk. Wolfe didn't reach for it. I did. He let me. The cover was stamped Confidential, European Theatre, 1944. Inside were faded carbons, half-erased names, and a cable referencing Operation Glass Key. No relation to Hammett, unfortunately. I flipped a page. Here's something. Subject spared, unidentified American operative believed to be infiltrating Axis channels under false flag. That ring a bell, Inspector? "Yeah," he said grimly. "It means our boy Milik let a spy walk who might have switched uniforms later." Wolfe tapped a finger on the desk blotter. "A man once spared may become a man owed or a man ashamed. Either sentiment suffices for murder." Kramer nodded. "Exactly. And before you ask, yes, I'm digging. But if this hits federal turf, I'll be lucky to get the memo before the ink's dry. They've already hinted I should keep my mitts off." "The federal hand," Wolfe said, "is seldom clean, nor patient." "That's why I'm here," Kramer shot back. "If this explodes into a spy case, you'll be knee-deep whether you want it or not, and I'd rather have you in front of it than under it." That was as close to a compliment as Kramer ever got. Wolfe considered him with a rare expression of respect. "Your candor is appreciated. You will, of course, keep the original file." "Thanks," Kramer said dryly, reclaiming the folder. "You can have the photostat." He stood, brushing cigar ash into the tray. "If your genius hatches anything, call me before the feds do. Maybe we'll both sleep one night this week." Wolfe inclined his head. A remote prospect, but not impossible. Kramer's mouth twitched toward a grin. "All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report." He left without slamming the door, which counted as harmony. When the echo faded, Wolfe tugged the bell cord. "Fritz, beer," I leaned back. "So Millick's guilty of humanitarian impulses during wartime. That's a novelty." He regarded me. "Mr. Goodwin, mercy is rarely practical. The spared man may now be here, cloaked in another name, compelled to silence his benefactor. The coincidence of time and geography is too exact." "Meaning you want me to find him before Kramer does?" "Before the Federal Bureau does," Wolfe corrected. "Inspector Kramer, for all his bluntness, retains integrity. Federal men, less so." Fritz arrived with the tray, set down a single chilled glass, and retreated like a Swiss ghost. Wolfe poured, the amber froth catching the lamplight. "We stand at an inflection, Archie. Our late client's secret concerns men who play at nations. We must be discreet." I grinned. "Sure, I'll be so discreet the Library of Congress won't notice me parachuting in." He scowled. "Do not be flippant. You will start by contacting Mr. Saul Panzer tomorrow morning. He can locate our potential resurrectee with minimal disturbance." "Fine. But if Saul ends up on a blacklist, I'm not testifying at his loyalty hearing." "You will do as instructed." He sipped his beer with ecclesiastical calm. "Meanwhile, type a memorandum summarizing tonight's visit. Include Kramer's demeanor. It indicates reluctant cooperation, which I value." "Reluctant cooperation? That's our specialty." I rolled a sheet into the typewriter and began tapping. The rhythmic clack filled the room while Wolfe drank and pondered. After a few minutes he spoke again. "You perceive, of course, that this spared man, whoever he is, constitutes both a key and a liability. His very existence refutes the neatness governments adore." "Yeah," I said without looking up. "He's a walking typo in their history." Wolfe allowed himself a faint smile. "An apt analogy. Correct it." I did, though my fingers itched to add a few editorial comments about Wolfe's typographical soul. When the page was finished, I slid it into the folder marked Millet's Case, Belgrade, and placed it in the drawer. "Anything else before you retreat to Orchids, I asked. He sighed, leaned back and studied the ceiling. "Only this. Should any representative of federal authority appear tomorrow, you will stall him. I dislike interruptions during the 10 to 11 bloom cycle." "Understood. I'll barricade the door with Fritz." He ignored that, eyes closing. "Archie, there are moments when I almost envy your levity." "That's mutual," I said. The clock struck 10:30, low and deliberate. Outside, a taxi horn wailed and faded. Wolfe's breathing evened, not quite sleep, but the next best thing. I doused the desk lamp, letting the room sink into half-shadow, the safe humming softly, the orchids faintly perfumed above. Somewhere in the city, a man who should have died in Belgrade was alive under another name. And if Wolfe was right, and he usually was, that man's gratitude had just turned homicidal. I went upstairs, leaving him with his beer and the ghosts of old wars. There's a certain kind of apartment that tells you more than the woman who owns it ever will. Vera Millet's was one of those. Soft lights, pale drapes, and perfume clinging to the air like an uninvited guest who doesn't know when to leave. The place was too elegant for mourning, too orderly for grief. A widow's smile might fool you. The furniture never does. She was sitting near the window when I came in, framed by the faintest hint of morning haze over Park Avenue. Her black dress was simple, but the pearls had ambition. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you have come to tell me you've found my husband's murderer?" "Not yet," I said, "but I've found a few things that make him harder to forget." She gestured to the armchair opposite. "Then please, forget nothing." I sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket, the one Millet had left. I'd taken it from the safe before I came over. "You recognize this?" Her hand trembled just a fraction. "Where did you get that?" "Your husband left it for Wolfe. It's addressed to the man I spared at Belgrade. Ring any bells?" She pressed her lips together, then nodded slowly. "I know the handwriting." "Your husband's?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, the man he spared." That got my attention. "You mean you knew him?" She looked away toward the window, eyes glinting faintly. "In the war, Everyone knew everyone. There were no strangers, only people who hadn't yet betrayed you. That's poetic, I said, but not helpful. Her tone sharpened. You Americans think history ends when you close the newspaper. For us, it begins there. She leaned forward, voice low. Dragan was ordered to kill an American officer in Belgrade, an OSS man accused of double-dealing with the enemy. Instead, he let him escape. He said the man carried proof of his innocence, and something else, something valuable. Valuable how? She gave a humorless smile. Icons, religious treasures taken from a monastery before it was bombed. Gold, jewels, things men die for under the banner of faith. Did he tell you where they went? She shook her head. No, but the American vanished after the war. Dragan believed he came here, to New York. He thought perhaps he would return the favor one day. By killing him. By remembering, she said softly. That line could have earned her a script credit in a Balkan melodrama, but the way she said it chilled the air. I studied her hands, elegant, unsteady, and pulled out the photograph I'd found at the gallery. Milix beside an American officer, his face scratched out. This your husband? I asked. Yes, that was taken in Belgrade, 1944. Her eyes dropped to the ruined face. He couldn't bear to look at that man again. He said the past had teeth. Got a name? She hesitated again. That told me she did. Come on, Mrs. Milix. You've already opened the door. Might as well let me in. Finally, she said, he called himself George Lanning, but that was not his real name. I let that hang in the air a moment. You sure about that? Quite. He visited me last week. If my eyebrows didn't go up, it was only because Wolfe trained me well. You're saying the same man your husband spared, supposedly an American spy, was here in your apartment? Yes. Her voice dropped. He said he wanted to express condolences. He brought wine. He seemed nervous. I thought it was grief. What did he call himself this time? Mr. Hale, Arthur Hale. That sounded too bland to be false, which usually means it is. He leave you anything? A card, a note, an excuse to visit again? No, but he asked strange questions, whether Dragan still had the icons, whether I knew where he kept his papers. I felt the pieces starting to line up like bottles on a bar shelf. And did you tell him? Her chin lifted sharply. I am not a fool, Mr. Goodwin. Didn't say you were. Just thorough. She turned away again, fingers tightening on the armrest. I told him nothing, but when he left, I had the feeling I'd seen him before, many years ago. Perhaps I imagined it. Faces change. Not intentions, I said. Her voice dropped. Do you think he killed my husband? I think you ought to lock your door and keep your blinds down. Her laugh was thin. Mr. Goodwin, I survived a war. Manhattan does not frighten me. Good, because if this story's true, Manhattan's about to return the favor. She rose and crossed to a small cabinet near the fireplace. From a drawer she pulled a smaller photo, sepia, worn at the edges, and handed it to me. Millet again, younger, smiling beside a man in an American uniform. This time the face wasn't scratched. Your husband kept this one intact, I said. He could not destroy all memories, she whispered. I tucked it carefully into my notebook. You mind if we borrow this for Mr. Wolfe's collection of headaches? Take it, she said. But if you find the man, promise me something. Depends what it costs. Tell him Dragan forgave him once. I wonder if that mercy was a mistake. I nodded, stood, and reached for my hat. Most mercies are, Mum. She gave me a look that could have thawed lead. You are cynical. Just punctual, I said. In my line, cynicism saves time. As I left, the smell of her perfume followed me down the hall, expensive, mournful, and faintly dangerous. Back in the cab, I replayed the talk in my head. The widow had been too composed, her grief measured like a dance step. Either she was tougher than she looked, or she was lying about something, possibly both. The name George Lanning tickled memory. Kramer had mentioned it in the OSS file. The odds of that being coincidence were about the same as Wolfe skipping lunch. By the time I reached West 35th, the night had rolled in, heavy with rain. Wolfe was in the office, surrounded by the smell of orchids and civilization. He looked up from a book as I entered. Well, he said. She talked, I told him. Milix spared an American officer named George Lanning, who later reappeared under the name Arthur Hale. He visited her last week asking about the icons. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. The icons again. So the motive circles back to avarice disguised as ideology. Looks that way. Did you obtain tangible proof? Photograph. Millick and the officer, wartime vintage. He reached out and I placed it before him. He studied it without comment, then set it neatly aside. Excellent, Archie. Your tact was commendable. Thanks, I said, suspicious of the tone. He reached for his beer, took a deliberate sip, and added, occasionally adequate. That restored the natural order. I gave him a look. Coming from you, that's like a medal. Then frame it, he said. Now call Mr. Pantzer. We must verify this Arthur Hale before our friends in law enforcement blunder into it first. I headed for the phone, grinning. She'd cried just enough to fog my notebook, not my judgment. And if her story held, we weren't chasing just a murderer anymore. We were chasing gratitude turned lethal. If you ever want proof civilization hangs by a thread, try spending your morning in a basement with an incinerator. Fritz treats that furnace like a priest handles relics. He uses tongs, prayers, and a face that says ashes should have social pedigree. So when Fritz called up the stairs at 10:02 with a tremor in his voice, I abandoned my coffee and went down. Coffee can wait. Fritz sounding rattled is an omen. The brownstone basement smells like soap, metal, and Fritz's pride. He stood beside the incinerator hatch, holding a spoon and a bent poker like surgical tools. On a scrap of concrete near his shoe lay a curled piece of paper, edges singed, ink bleeding like a guilty conscience. I was cleaning, he said, breath short. Someone burned this. I crouched, picked it up with 2 fingers and squinted. Burn marks, partial stamp, and just enough text to ruin a quiet week. Tell the man I spared in Belgrade. Do not speak to anyone. Washington urges silence, name under protection, and a signature, half gone but still clear in outline, K. I let out a low whistle. Well, Fritz, congratulations, you just pulled a rabbit out of the ash pile. He blinked. Is that good, Mr. Archie? That depends if the rabbit bites. I pocketed the scrap. Turned the furnace off. Fritz swore he hadn't burned it. The basement hatch is street level. Any night visitor with nerves or keys could have fed a note to the flames. Nobody else burns secrets in this house without permission. Back upstairs, Wolfe sat at his desk, reviewing a seed catalogue as if the fate of orchids outweighed federal telegrams. I laid the charred paper in front of him. He studied it, nostrils flaring the way most men sniff fine wine. Burned clandestinely, he murmured. A telegram from Washington urging silence. Our late client was warned. And ignored it, or someone decided he ignored it. A distinction without mercy. I phoned Saul Panzer. Saul, I need a trace. Name fragment Lanning, tied to Washington, Yugoslavia, maybe cultural work, and fast. Saul grunted, his version of enthusiasm, and hung up before I could finish breathing. Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz! Fritz appeared, immaculate again despite recent ash surgery. Beer, Wolfe said. A small one. I am not yet resigned to the day. I couldn't help smirking. Good news, then. The day's not resigned to you either. He shot me a glacial glance. Ignorance drips from you like ink from a schoolboy. Better ink than ashes. Saul called back at 10:42. Got him, he said with calm triumph. George Lanning, former OSS liaison in Belgrade Theatre, currently a cultural attaché turned assistant curator at the Metropolitan Museum. Art and diplomacy. Nice cocktail. Thanks to Saul. Bill me gently. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. We've got movement. Lanning's alive in New York, surrounded by priceless art instead of bulk and rubble. Wolfe leaned back, fingers templed. The Metropolitan. His tone suggested it needed disinfecting. Of course. Institutions are the favoured shelter of repentance and evasion. Or both. Indeed. Want me to go shake hands with culture? No, he said firmly. You will proceed to the museum only after luncheon. I refuse to have you arrested before 1 o'clock. That's touching, but I'm not planning to knock over a Rembrandt. Federal entanglements are unpredictable. You may speak to Mr. Lanning only if opportunity permits a voluntary, unobserved encounter. No badges, no press. Got it. Polite espionage. He grunted. Praise, Wolfe style. Then, good work, Archie. I blinked. Say that again. I want witnesses. He didn't repeat it. Fritz, my beer. I watched him savour the chilled glass as if congratulating himself on mentoring me into minimal competence. Fine, I'd take it. Wolfe's compliments arrive less often than Halley's comet, and burn just as bright before disappearing. At 12:30, the rain arrived without manners, hard, grey, committed. I pulled on my coat, checked my notebook, and headed out. Midtown in rain looks like it stole Paris's wardrobe and feels twice as self-important. Taxis hissed past, umbrellas bloomed like black flowers, and doormen saluted misery with dry coats. The Metropolitan Museum rises out of the city like someone tried to fortress culture against time and failed. Inside, the marble floors echoed judgment. I shook off the rain and joined the tide of tourists who believed culture came with tickets. Assistant curator's office? I asked a guard who had the personality of marble dust. Up the west stairs, office wing. I climbed. Corridors smelled of old varnish and new ambition. Cases held ancient bronze faces staring like they knew secrets better than Washington ever would. I passed through medieval galleries, glimpsing icons gold-leafed and staring holy. Every one of them could have been one of Millet's ghosts. That made my stomach prickly. When art starts talking louder than people, you know a case has teeth. A secretary with lacquered hair and typewriter reflexes looked up. Yes? I'm here for Mr. Lanning. Name? Goodwin, Archie. She frowned like I'd offered counterfeit currency. He's in a meeting. Perfect, I said cheerfully. I'm here to surprise him. She looked alarmed, so I softened it. Professional call. We shared a mutual acquaintance in Belgrade. Something in her eyes flickered. Guilt, worry, a hangnail. Hard to tell. Wait here, she said stiffly, and vanished behind a mahogany door. I leaned on the wall, pretending to admire a 17th century painting of a saint who looked like he needed aspirin. The secretary returned, lips tight. Mr. Lanning stepped out for a private appointment. Sure he did. Red herring number 47. Tell him Goodwin dropped by, I said. He'll either faint or flee. Both are helpful. On the way back down, I detoured through Byzantine galleries. Icons gazed back, solemn, perfect, untouched by bombs or betrayal. For men who kill over principle, these things seem to inspire a surprising number of knife wounds. Outside, the rain slapped the city awake. My coat soaked through like it resented my choices. I grabbed a cab and headed home. At 3:58, dangerously close to orchid hour, I entered the office. Wolfe sat upright, preparing to rise, timing his ascent to botanical worship. Well, he demanded. He ducked me, but he's there, and nervous. Might have seen the front of the building shake when I walked in. Pfui, Wolfe stood. Nerves do not constitute guilt, merely humanity. Continue tomorrow. That's it. For now, I will not sully orchid time with espionage. Fine. I'll go polish my spy shoes. He paused at the elevator gate, looked back and, rare moment, nodded. Competent progress. Careful, I said. Too much praise and I'll faint. He vanished upstairs. Fritz appeared moments later with the afternoon beer tray for me. Bless him, the man reads crises in silence. I sat, dripping rain on the rug, staring at the burned telegram. Washington. Silence. Lanning. Even our trash tells better stories than some suspects, and this one was only getting louder. The Metropolitan Museum looks its best when it's closed and someone's just been murdered. That's not an advertisement, just an observation. The lights were half-dimmed, echoing through marble like a bad conscience, and the guards were trying to look less rattled than the art. When I arrived, Kramer was already pacing in the west wing with his cigar lit and his temper smoking harder. He spotted me and barked, "Goodwin! Don't tell me Wolfe sent you to admire the exhibits." Not exactly, I said. We heard one of them decided to drink something stronger than champagne. He grunted. Stronger and deadlier. Lanning's in his office. Poisoned. I hope your boss enjoys being right, because this one's about to be another mess with his name on it. Wolfe doesn't enjoy being right, I told him. He considers it maintenance. That earned me half a glare before he turned toward the museum office. Pearlie Stebbins stood guard at the door, broad as a freight car. The smell of champagne drifted out. Sweet. Wrong. Inside, the late George Lanning was slumped behind his desk, tuxedo rumpled, mouth parted around a final argument he didn't get to finish. One glass stood half empty beside a bottle of vintage that looked too expensive for regret. Kramer's voice came through the haze. We found traces of cyanide. Whoever did it was neat. No fingerprints, no prints on the cork. Closed room, one key in his pocket. I scanned the office. Catalogues, correspondence, a few museum tags. You check the crates? What crates? The ones stamped from the Yugoslav Relief Gallery, back of the loading corridor. I passed them on the way in. Kramer frowned. Stebbins? Pearlie moved like a tank toward the hallway. I followed. There were 6 crates stacked neatly under a skylight. Museum issue, stenciled numbers, custom seals, the whole patriotic front. One label caught my eye. Belgrade Collection, Anton Radek and Kopim. Well, bless my consistent luck, I said. Radek again. He's more attached to corpses than the Undertakers' Union. Pearlie pried one open with a crowbar. Inside was straw, canvas, and a wooden icon of some saint who'd seen better days. I flipped it over and tapped the back. Hollow. Hand me your knife, I said. Stebbins growled, but obliged. I worked the edge under the rear panel and lifted it free. Inside the cavity were 3 tight rolls of microfilm sealed in wax paper. Pearlie whistled. Pictures? Film, I said. And not of landscapes. This looks like government stock, classified, ugly, and misplaced. Kramer arrived, cigar still blazing. What the devil? Microfilm, I said. Smuggled inside art. Somebody's been using Belgrade saints to ship Washington secrets. He took the film, holding it as if it might detonate. How do you figure Wolfe's mixed up in this? I don't, I said. But the Gazette will. Lon Cohen's already sniffing the air for scandal. Kramer muttered something unprintable. Great. Public opinion's going to hang us both. Cheer up, I said. You've still got me for company. He shot me a look that could sterilize marble. That's supposed to help? Before I could answer, one of the lab men called out, Inspector, the bottle. Residue matches the victim's prints only. No trace of foreign powder in the glass. Poison was in the champagne itself. Delivered sealed? Kramer asked. Yes, sir. So, he drank it straight from the bottle. Somebody gave it to him ready to die. I said, maybe from a friend. That was enough speculation to earn me a ride back to the brownstone under official glare. I phoned ahead. Fritz had dinner on, but Wolfe waited in the office, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together. The air was thick with the smell of beef consommé and aggravation. Kramer followed me in, shaking rain off his coat. All right, Wolfe. Your man here just found microfilm in museum crates and another corpse with your client's fingerprints in the footnotes. I'm getting heat from downtown saying you're stonewalling for a spy ring. Wolfe opened his eyes slowly. Preposterous. Tell that to the Gazette. Lon Cohen's already printed your name with the word mystery twice and conspiracy once. Mr. Cohen, Wolfe said, is a journalistic gadfly whose imagination exceeds his ethics. I assume you're here for facts, not innuendo. I'm here, Kramer said, because Washington's already sniffing around and I'd rather deal with your fat vocabulary than a federal subpoena. That was the closest thing to diplomacy I'd ever heard from him. Wolfe gestured toward the red leather chair. Then sit, Inspector. Mr. Goodwin will provide the sequence. I laid it out. The crates, the icon, the film. Wolfe listened without moving, except for a faint quiver of the lip when I said microfilm. When I finished, he asked, and the deceased's demeanour before death? Deadly polite, I said. Office locked, no signs of struggle. If suicide was stylish, he'd qualify. Phooey! Wolfe's voice was dry thunder. No man imbibes cyanide with champagne unless compelled by fear or assurance. Kramer puffed smoke. Or tricked. Perhaps. Wolfe reached for a slip of paper and began jotting notes. Inspector, the presence of microfilm in crates consigned through Radek's gallery suggests espionage disguised as art commerce. Millick's death removed one participant, Lanning's another. The beneficiary of both is concealed by bureaucracy. Meaning what? Meaning, Wolfe said, that whoever our mystery correspondent is, this Lanning's contact, feared exposure once Millick's conscience stirred. He silenced both to preserve a trade route of information. Kramer leaned forward. You've got names? Not yet. Then you've got guesses. I have deductions, Wolfe said coldly. The murderer possesses official sanction sufficient to move shipments through customs. He knows art, speaks diplomacy, and has the arrogance of immunity. That narrows the field unpleasantly. Kramer rose. Wolfe, I'm running a homicide squad, not the State Department. I can't indict arrogance. You can, however, avoid impeding my work, Wolfe replied. Mr. Goodwin's impertinence is my prerogative, Inspector, not yours. That landed like a velvet hammer. I tried not to grin. Kramer's mouth twitched. All right, Wolfe. You've got 12 hours before the feds claim this case. After that, you're just another bystander with vocabulary. He stubbed out his cigar in the ashtray, stood and buttoned his coat. And for God's sake, tell your friend Cohen to quit writing headlines with my name under yours. I do not control the press, Wolfe said. If I did, it would read more coherently. Kramer gave me a look that said, babysit him, and left. The door clicked behind him, sealing the quiet like a tomb. Wolfe sat motionless for a full minute, then exhaled. Archie. Yeah? Fetch me the Gazette. I did. He scanned the front page with visible disgust. The headline read, Spy Trail Ends in Nero Wolfe's Orchid Room. He muttered, Idiocy multiplied. At least they spelled your name right, I said. He ignored me. You will telephone Mr. Cohen. Inform him that if he wishes to continue enjoying your occasional confidences, he will retract this nonsense tomorrow. Sure, I said. He'll print it right under the weather report. Wolfe glared. Do so. I went to the phone. Lon Cohen answered with the enthusiasm of a man expecting trouble. Archie, tell me it isn't true. What isn't? That your boss is running cover for an international spy ring while sipping beer. Only half right, I said. He prefers it chilled. Archie, listen, Lon. You print another headline with his name in it before you hear from me, and he'll make you wish the Gazette published obituaries by the pound. Capiche? A pause, then a sigh. Fine, but I'll need something to replace it. You'll get it, I said, if you're patient, which I know violates company policy. I hung up before he could argue. Wolfe was watching me with that look professors give unruly pupils. Satisfied? Ecstatic. He sighed, leaned back, and tugged the bell cord. Fritz. Fritz appeared with the beer tray. The sound of the cap easing off the bottle was the first peaceful thing in an hour. Wolfe filled the glass carefully, golden bubbles rising like proof of civilization. Archie, he said, I will require a list of every known associate of Millick's, Radek, and Lanning who maintained federal connections during the past 5 years, include embassy staff, relief agencies, and museums. That's a big net. Then begin casting. Sure, I said, but what if I catch a whale? Then we shall dine well, he murmured. He took a long, deliberate drink, eyes half closing. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the window like a metronome for doom. I sat at my desk, typed up the night's summary, and couldn't resist one closing line. Leave it to New York to frame murder as a cultural event. Wolfe read it over my shoulder, harumphed, and said, a vulgar phrasing, but not inaccurate. He drained his glass, motioned for the refill, and muttered, this affair grows odious, yet I suspect the next act will bring illumination. It did, though not the kind he meant. The phone rang. I picked it up, listened, and froze. What's that address? Wolfe's eyes opened. Who? Radek, I said. He's vanished. The rain hammered harder. As if applauding the timing, Wolfe reached for his beer with grim calm. Then, Archie, we are indeed in the final movement. By the time Saul and I found Anton Radek, he'd traded his gallery's charm for a storage room that smelled like turpentine and panic. Midtown rain clung to the windows, turning the crates into shadowy ghosts. Radek stood with his back to us, sleeves rolled, cigarette trembling in his fingers. When he turned, the slick smile was gone. In its place was a face that had finally realized art doesn't pay as well as treason. I told you, he began, voice brittle, I am finished talking to police. That's fine, I said, shutting the door behind me. We're not police. We're worse. We listen. Saul stayed quiet, as usual, his flat cap dripping onto the concrete. He leaned against a crate labelled Sacred Holdings, Relief Shipment number 24, like he'd been born there. Radek's gaze darted between us. What do you want? The truth, I said. But I'll settle for an invoice. A man named Millick is dead. Another named Lanning followed him. Both were connected to your art shipments. Start painting. He tried a shrug. Coincidence. Saul's hand closed over another crate and gave it a single, deliberate knock. Sounds hollow, boss. Yeah, I said. So is your story. Radek's lips twitched, then flattened. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it underfoot. You don't understand. After the war, everything was grey. Men like Milik, like me, we had connections. The Allies wanted art, the Soviets wanted secrets. We traded both. Sometimes the icons were real, sometimes the information. The shipments ran through relief channels, museums, galleries. Everyone got what they wanted. Except the corpses, I said. He flinched. Lanning was part of it. So was Milik. They made their own deals. Then Milik found proof that one of our sponsors, the American in Belgrade, was still alive. He threatened to expose him. The man Milik spared? Radek nodded. Yes, we called him the Ghost. He had no name, only an initial in the books, K. He paid for silence. Milik's wanted more, and now they are both dead. You see how this works? I glanced at Saul. How much for a guided tour through your bookkeeping? Radek hesitated, then crossed to a small iron cabinet. Inside were ledgers stacked like relics. He handed me one, the ink still smelling fresh. The handwriting was neat, slanted European style. Names, dates and payments ran down the page. Millet, Lanning, Radek, and near the bottom a scrawl that stopped my pulse for half a second. K, transfer, Washington liaison. Looks like your Ghost was paid directly from the capital, I said, and not in lunch money. Radek swallowed. I swear I never knew his full name. He spoke to us through intermediaries. But the funds were legitimate. Military accounts, art restoration budgets. They used beauty to buy betrayal. Saul took a long breath, then said softly, You done? Radek looked at him. What will you do with this? That depends, I said. If you're smart, you'll come quietly to Wolfe. He prefers live witnesses. Dead ones ruin his digestion. Wolfe, he whispered, as if it were a foreign word. He will expose this? He'll expose whatever keeps him from eating in peace, I said. And right now, that's you. We got him to the brownstone by mid-afternoon. Wolfe was in the office, the orchids safe in their humid Eden upstairs. Fritz had just removed the lunch plates. The smell of roast duck still lingered, civilized and untouchable. Wolfe didn't rise. He eyed Radek like a species unfit for display. Mr. Radek, you traffic in art, but also in falsehood. Sit. Radek obeyed. He looked smaller in the red leather chair, as most men do when their conscience catches up with them. Wolfe turned to me. Proceed, Archie. I placed the ledger on the desk and flipped to the page marked K. Wolfe read it once, twice, and exhaled through his nose. So, our phantom is indeed American. Post-war ties to Yugoslav intelligence now disguised under institutional decorum. Fui. Predictable. Name? I asked. He tapped the page with one finger. Colonel Kendrick. I blinked. You know him? I worked with him briefly, Wolfe said, voice clipped. Office of Strategic Services, London, 1944. A competent man, but morally allergic to simplicity. He fancied himself a sculptor of politics. Well, he's sculpting bodies now, I said. Wolfe's mouth twitched, humorless. Mercy, it seems, has exacted its interest. Milik spared Kendrick's life. Kendrick repaid the favour with silence, and now, apparently, erasure. Radek's eyes widened. You mean he— Yes, Wolfe said. He arranged these deaths to bury the chain that leads back to him. Milik's blackmail threatened exposure. Lanning's murder silenced the intermediary. You, Mr. Radek, were to be the next exhibit in his gallery of disappearance. Radek made a sound halfway between a sob and a confession. You must tell the police. I will, Wolfe interrupted, when the noose is secure. Inspector Kramer is not fond of being toyed with by men in Washington. I said, neither are we. He turned to me. Archie, telephone Colonel Kendrick's office. Inform him that Nero Wolfe has obtained documentation concerning his wartime activities and requires clarification. Want me to tell him we're sending orchids or subpoenas? Neither. Tell him it's urgent and that I'm in no mood for euphemism. I made the call. After 3 operators and 1 secretary who sounded like she ironed her conscience daily, Kendrick himself came on the line. His voice was deep, polished, confident, the kind that buys its own applause. Mr. Wolfe, he said, it's been some time. Not long enough, Wolfe replied. I trust Washington's weather hasn't dampened your appetite for deceit. Now really, Kendrick chuckled, is this about the Yugoslav shipments? My dear man, those were wartime contingencies. 2 men are dead, Wolfe said, and your contingency continues to draw breath under false invoices. Careful, Wolfe, you have no jurisdiction. I have intellect, Wolfe snapped, and evidence, financial and testimonial. You will either come to New York tomorrow to explain yourself or wait for my communication with Inspector Kramer. I imagine he will find your diplomacy illuminating. A pause, then a low, deliberate tone. You always were intolerably direct. Flattery will not avail you, Wolfe said. I suggest haste. My patience diminishes hourly. The line clicked dead. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing briefly. So, our ghost walks into daylight tomorrow. I grinned. When your colonel shows up in your suspect list, it's either career suicide or promotion. Neither, he said. It is justice attempting balance. Radek shifted uneasily. And me? Wolfe regarded him coolly. You will remain under Mr. Goodwin's observation until morning. If you attempt flight, you will not enjoy the consequences. I added, meaning me, not Fritz. Wolfe ignored the interruption. Saul will verify your ledger against customs records. The falsified crates, those labelled as Belgrade relief, should suffice to prove collusion. He reached for his beer, the glass catching the lamplight. You see, Archie, he said finally, almost weary, mercy is rarely economical. Neither is treason, I said. True. He lifted the glass in faint salute. But treason at least pays better, until it doesn't. I filed the ledger, watched the rain slide down the window, and wondered what tomorrow's visit from Washington would look like. With Wolfe, it was never just conversation. It was a reckoning in slow motion. And if Kendrick thought Manhattan was his frame, he was about to learn who really signed the portrait. By 9 that morning, the brownstone looked less like a home and more like a fortified embassy. The press had turned the sidewalk into a zoo, cameras flashing every time Fritz cracked the door to receive the milk bottles. Headlines were calling Wolfe everything from the Manhattan monk of espionage to the fat man who knows too much. Wolfe ignored it all with the same calm he used on salad dressing, contemptuous restraint. We kept Radek under our roof overnight. Morning would bring the mob and, I suspected, official paper. I was in the office with the shades drawn and the phone ringing like a fire alarm. Lon Cohen had already called twice, the Gazette begging for a quote. Wolfe had refused, muttering something about journalistic cannibalism. At 9:42 the bell rang, and this time it wasn't a delivery boy or a camera flash. Fritz opened the door and came back with a look that could have wilted the orchids upstairs. Inspector Kramer, he said. That name in Fritz's tone meant a day was about to become inconvenient. Kramer entered like a man walking into his own bad dream. Rumpled overcoat, cigar clamped like a declaration of war, a folded document in one hand. Good morning, I said. If you're selling subscriptions, the boss only reads Latin. Cut it, Goodwin, he growled. I've got a warrant. He dropped it on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even turn from the beer he was pouring. Yes, beer before noon. Desperate times. A warrant, Wolfe repeated. For what, precisely? For your cooperation, Kramer said. Federal jurisdiction's in play now. Kendrick's in the wind. Washington's breathing down my neck. And I'm not supposed to set foot in this house without an invitation. So consider this legal permission to annoy you. Charming, Wolfe said. Do sit. Kramer sat but didn't relax. They want to bring your boy in for questioning, he said, jerking his thumb toward me. The Bureau's convinced Goodwin knows where Kendrick is. I gave a low whistle. Nice of them to promote me from witness to accomplice. Kramer's mouth twisted. Don't gloat, Goodwin. They're serious. I'm the only reason a squad car isn't already parked out front waiting to drag you downtown. Touching loyalty, I said. Almost paternal. Don't push it. Wolfe finally turned, face like granite warmed by intellect. Inspector, you will inform your federal colleagues that Mr. Goodwin acts under my employ. His movements are not subject to their subpoenas, nor yours, unless accompanied by due courtesy and prior notice. Kramer exhaled smoke. You're skating close to contempt, Wolfe. I reside there comfortably, Wolfe said. You, however, are not here merely to threaten. Kramer hesitated. Then he leaned forward, elbows on knees. All right, you want it straight. Washington's ordered me to sit this one out. The Bureau says it's a matter of national sensitivity. That's their term for, we've made a mess and need someone else to clean it quietly. Wolfe nodded once. And you wish me to solve it before they do. I didn't say that. You didn't need to. You bring a warrant you don't intend to use, risk your job, and come here before breakfast. It is plain enough. Kramer's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Fine, you're right. I want the truth before they bury it. You and we've both had enough of political cleanups. That was as close to partnership as Kramer got. Wolfe folded the warrant neatly, set it aside, and said, Very well. What do you possess that I do not? A mess of nothing, Kramer said. Kendrick's files are sealed, his subordinates won't talk. But we found something at the museum last night. His briefcase, hidden behind a false panel in the curator's office. Empty except for this. He handed me an envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, and unmarked except for a faint watermark. Federal Diplomatic Corps. I slit it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet with a code that looked like it had been written by a drunk telegraph operator. Wolfe glanced at it, frowned, and said, Cipher, a primitive one. Kramer puffed. We already ran it through military cryptographers. No luck. Of course not, Wolfe said. The key isn't numerical, it's linguistic. The page carries the same routing code prefix as the Washington telegram Fritz rescued from the ashes, Kendrick's old OSS channel. He reached for his dictionary of Balkan dialects. Yes, he keeps one, and flipped through the pages with slow precision. Kendrick fancied himself a scholar. This is Serbo-Croatian mixed with Latin declension. The pattern repeats. He pointed to a cluster of symbols. When translated, it reads, Honor repaid in silence. Cryptic, I said, even for a cryptogram. Wolfe continued, eyes narrowing. There is more. The signature. I looked closer. The final mark on the page, faintly indented but visible under lamplight, was a single capital K. Kramer said, His initial. No, Wolfe murmured. It is not an author's mark. It is an identification. Kendrick was declaring himself the spared man, the one Millix let live in Belgrade. For once, even Kramer was speechless. I said, So our colonel was both ghost and puppeteer. That's tidy. Kramer rubbed his forehead. It fits. Washington's protecting him because he's one of theirs, but they don't know you've figured it out. Nor shall they, Wolfe said. Yet. At that moment, a small sound interrupted the tension, a rustle at the door, soft as paper on tile. I turned, crossed the room, and found a note that had been slipped under the threshold. Plain envelope, no address. I tore it open. The handwriting was bold, deliberate. Mr. Wolfe, I request 1 hour of your time before nightfall. Matters of conscience compel me. I am the man whom Millix spared. G.K. G.K., I said aloud. George Kendrick. Kramer swore. He's taunting you. Or confessing, Wolfe said. The distinction often lies in phrasing. I checked the clock. You want him here, I can make that happen. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Precisely. You will contact his office. Tell his secretary you represent a private foundation offering testimonial protection for his services abroad. The phrase diplomatic immunity should suffice to stir his pride. I grinned. When the US government sends love letters, they don't sign them. I guess we'll write one for them. Kramer shook his head. You're both insane. If he suspects a trap... He will come nonetheless, Wolfe said. Pride is an efficient courier. Kramer stood, grinding the cigar dead. I can't officially endorse this, but I'll have a unit nearby in case your guest decides to turn this place into a firing range. How considerate, Wolfe said. Your discretion does you credit, Inspector. He started for the door, then paused. You realize, if this goes wrong, I'll have to arrest you both. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. You have said as much on 27 occasions, yet here we remain unincarcerated. Good day, Inspector. Kramer looked at me. Keep your head down, Goodwin. That's my second best feature, I said. When he left, the brownstone exhaled like it had been holding its breath. Wolfe leaned back, hands clasped over his stomach. Archie, dictate a memorandum of the morning's events. File it under Kendrick, pending confession. I rolled the typewriter closer. The keys clacked while rain began to patter against the windows. What do we do if he doesn't show? He will. And if he brings company, I will improvise. That'll be the day. Wolfe allowed himself the faintest smile. You are learning insolence from the wrong masters. Only from the best, I said. He gestured toward the hidden safe. Retrieve the microfilm and the ledger. They are our leverage. Kendrick will not wish to see his sins displayed before federal peers. I did as told, placing both items neatly on the desk. The evidence glimmered like the final pieces of a long, crooked puzzle. At 1 p.m., Fritz appeared at the door. Lunch, he said, as though it were a declaration of truce. Ah, Wolfe sighed. Providence restores sanity. While he ate, I typed a short memo for Lon Cohen, promising an exclusive after the dust settled. Wolfe noticed but didn't comment. He understood my brand of diplomacy. At 2:30, the press grew louder outside, a crowd chanting questions nobody inside intended to answer. I cracked the blinds. Reporters, photographers, even a few curious neighbours. Your fan club's multiplying, I said. Wolfe didn't look up. Popularity is the refuge of mediocrity. Then you're safe, I muttered. At 3:45, the phone rang again. Saul Panzer, calm as ever. Archie, he said. Kendrick's aide just left the embassy annex, headed uptown. My guess? Your place. Thanks, Saul. Keep a tail, but stay invisible. Always, he said, and hung up. Wolfe closed his eyes. Excellent. Fritz will prepare a cold supper. I suspect we will dine late. I started pacing, listening to the street noise swell and ebb. The orchids upstairs were probably the only living things in the building unaware that a showdown was coming. By 6 o'clock, the light outside had turned yellow-grey. Wolfe sipped beer in patient silence. At 6:17, a car engine idled at the curb. Headlights swept across the window. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Fritz glanced at Wolfe. He nodded. When the door opened, Colonel George Kendrick stood there, tall, composed, a face that could have been carved from secrecy itself. His coat was immaculate, his hat tilted at an angle that implied power and apology. "Mr. Wolfe," he said evenly, "I believe I owe you an explanation." "You do," Wolfe said, "and I intend to collect." I shut the door behind him and thought, well, there goes our quiet evening. Wolfe motioned to the red chair. "Be seated, Colonel. You are prompt. I admire that in a man of divided loyalties." Kendrick's eyes flicked to me, then back to Wolfe. "You've read the note?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and you will elaborate. But first, tell me, did you kill Milish and Lanning?" Kendrick's jaw tightened. "I did not, but I am responsible for their deaths." I let out a low breath. "That's a distinction you might have trouble explaining to Kramer." He ignored me. "Milik spared my life in Belgrade. I repaid that mercy poorly. When I discovered he'd resumed contact with former associates, Radek, Lanning, I feared exposure. I tried to silence the trail legally through Washington channels. Someone else decided to act permanently." "And that someone?" Wolfe asked. Kendrick's eyes hardened. "A man inside the Bureau, but I can prove it, if you help me survive the next 24 hours. That hung in the air like a verdict. Wolfe's gaze never wavered. "Then, Colonel, you are in the correct sanctuary. But I warn you, truth here is non-negotiable." Outside, a camera flash burst white through the curtains. The world was waiting. And for once, Wolfe and Kramer were on the same side of the storm. You can always tell when Wolfe's planning a public execution, of the verbal kind, that is. The air in the office thickens like soup. Fritz polishes the beer glasses twice, and I'm expected to polish the guests. That night, the brownstone felt like a courtroom with better catering. At 7:45 sharp, the cast filed in. Vera Milish first, tense, beautiful, dressed in black that said she'd given up mourning and taken up style. Behind her, Radek came slinking like a cat who'd seen the canary feathers on his own chin. Kramer brought up the rear with his usual grimace and cigar, looking like he'd been dragged from a precinct meeting he hadn't enjoyed. And then, of course, Colonel George Kendrick, upright, immaculate, carrying guilt the way other men carry medals. He nodded to Wolfe, all smooth courtesy. "I appreciate your invitation, Mr. Wolfe, though I can't say I understand it." "You will," Wolfe said. His tone was velvet, stretched over steel. "Be seated, all of you." I closed the office door and took my usual place by the globe stand, pretending to look casual. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingertips meeting in their accustomed steeple. The only sound was the grandfather clock and the faint hum of Fritz somewhere in the dining room, probably laying out beer like an altar offering. "My apologies for the late hour," Wolfe began, "but truth, like digestion, requires proper timing. Inspector, I trust your presence indicates official sanction." Kramer snorted. "You said you had the killer. I'm listening." "Good." Wolfe's eyes shifted from face to face. "We have all chased shadows these past days. Microfilm, forged icons, blackmail, and honor mislaid in the fog of diplomacy. Yet the essence of this affair lies in something simple, a man's grammar." That earned me a look from Kramer. "Grammar?" "Yes," Wolfe said mildly. "A word is a confession, Inspector, if one listens properly." He reached for a folder, my typing clean and crisp, and drew out a single sheet. "Here we have Colonel Kendrick's letter, the one left beneath my door this morning. He writes, quote, 'I am the man whom Millich spared.'" Kendrick sat perfectly still. "And?" "An educated man such as yourself," Wolfe said, "would never make that error. Who, not whom, is correct, for it is the subject of the verb spared. Such a mistake might seem trivial, unless, of course, it reveals premeditation." Vera frowned. "I don't see—" Wolfe raised a finger. "You will. That phrasing was copied from another letter, Millich's telegram, the one burned in my incinerator. Fritz discovered its ashes, still legible enough to reconstruct the line, 'Tell the man I spared in Belgrade to remember.'" I watched Kendrick's jaw tighten. Wolfe's gaze didn't move. "Colonel, when you penned your note, you unconsciously echoed Millis's own words. You knew the telegram's phrasing because you wrote it yourself, as a test to see whether Millis would obey your warning to remain silent." Kramer straightened, cigar forgotten. "Hold it. You're saying Kendrick sent the telegram?" "I am," Wolfe said. "It originated from Washington, bearing the same code prefix used in Kendrick's wartime transmissions. When Millet ignored the warning, you silenced him personally. Later, when Lanning uncovered the microfilm, you poisoned him to ensure your connection remained buried." Kendrick rose, face pale but voice steady. "That's preposterous." "Sit," Wolfe commanded. "You will not profit from melodrama." To his credit, Kendrick obeyed. Vera, however, had gone white. "Then all of it, the gallery, the crates, was for him?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Radek's shipments concealed microfilm, not art. Kendrick funded the operation through cultural grants, then used those same channels to suppress any who might expose him." Radek looked like he'd swallowed a tack. "I didn't know. I only—" "Phooey," Wolfe interrupted. "You knew enough to cash his checks." Kramer leaned forward. "What about evidence?" "Archie," Wolfe said. I slid the ledger across the desk. "His handwriting matches the payment entries, Inspector, and those payments lead straight to a government liaison account, all perfectly patriotic." Kendrick's composure cracked for the first time. "You don't understand, Wolfe. Those operations were sanctioned. Everything we did was to keep balance in a chaotic world." Wolfe's eyes chilled. "Murder is a poor instrument for equilibrium." "It was mercy," Kendrick's voice rose. "Millich wanted to expose a network that could still be useful. He would have destroyed careers, lives. I spared him in Belgrade once. I couldn't allow him to ruin everything later." I couldn't help myself. "He came to be spared twice, Colonel. Wolfe doesn't do reruns." That got me a glare from Kramer and a faint, unholy twinkle from Wolfe. "Inspector," Wolfe said, "the method of the murders was as deliberate as their motive. Cyanide in champagne, a gentleman's death. Kendrick wished to cloak his brutality and civility. His telegram ashes, his grammatical vanity, and his subsequent overture to me complete the picture. The man I spared, indeed." Kramer blew out a breath, rubbing his chin. "You're saying he killed them both to bury the blackmail and then came here hoping to square it with you?" "Exactly," Wolfe said. "He wished absolution disguised as cooperation." Kendrick stood again, this time not in defiance but defeat. "You think you've proven something. You can't—" Kramer rose too, slow and final. "Colonel George Kendrick, you're under arrest for the murders of Stefan Millich and George Lanning. Anything you say—" Kendrick cut him off with a weary wave. "Don't bother, Inspector. I wrote enough reports in my time to know how they end." He turned to Wolfe. You're wrong about one thing. I didn't come for absolution. I came because I knew you'd finish it cleanly. Wolfe inclined his head. A distinction without difference. Take him. Stebbins, who'd been waiting outside, entered to escort Kendrick away. The colonel didn't struggle. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, a man tidying himself for disgrace. Vera's eyes followed him until the door closed. He was right about one thing, she said softly. Mercy costs too much. Wolfe nodded once. And payment, once deferred, demands interest. Kramer lingered, pocketing the warrant he'd never used. All right, Wolfe, I'll admit it. You did it clean. I prefer precision to cleanliness, Wolfe said. Whatever you call it, you're still a pain in the neck. Kramer started for the door, then stopped. But thanks. Wolfe gave him a solemn look. Inspector, gratitude from you is as rare as moderation in politics. I value it accordingly. Kramer grunted, half a smile tugging at his mouth, and left. Silence returned, thick and oddly peaceful. Fritz appeared at the door. Beer, sir? Yes, Wolfe said, almost tenderly. 2 bottles. Mr. Goodwin has earned one. That startled me more than the confession had. Fritz raised an eyebrow, but fetched them. When he was gone, Wolfe leaned back, letting the hush settle. Archie, he said finally, you may note this evening in your records as an instance where justice and language conspired agreeably. Sure, I said. Though between you and me, I think Kramer's going to need a grammar refresher before his report. He gave me a look half weary, half amused. Archie, you are incorrigible. Occupational hazard. He sighed and reached for his beer, holding it like a chalice, then let us toast to incorrigibility and to the orchids awaiting my attention. Planning to tell them the case is closed, I asked. They will infer it from my serenity. He took a long sip, eyes closing as if the world had righted itself again. I finished mine in silence, the carbonation of victory fizzing pleasantly in the background. After a while, Wolfe said, Archie, please arrange that I be left alone with my orchids. And a beer. Sure, I said, standing. You've earned it. Besides, I've got a date with my typewriter and a headline for Lon Cohen that'll make the Gazette sing. What vulgarity will you employ this time? Something tasteful, I said. Mercy kills twice, the man Wolfe didn't spare. He groaned, but there was the faintest smile hiding in it, the kind that only Archie Goodwin ever earned. I turned off the lights on my way out. Behind me, Wolfe sat in the glow of the lamp, still and content, a man who had balanced another set of moral ledgers and found them at last, in order. Upstairs the orchids waited, perfect, silent, and mercifully indifferent to men who spared too much or too little.